This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
The 5th of December, 1872.
Ship on the starboard bow!
The captain of the brigantine Dei Gratia sights a ship in the Atlantic, 800 miles off the Portuguese coast. It appears to be unmanned and steering wild.
Ahoy there! Captain Briggs! Ahoy! Anyone aboard?
The only reply is an eerie creaking. No one appears on deck. The ship is completely forsaken. What happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste is one of the enduring mysteries of the sea.
We represent the government of the United States of America. We have permission from your government to board your vessel.
Today, Coast Guardsmen are accustomed to finding abandoned vessels.
Stand by and prepare to be boarded.
The first boarding is tense and dangerous.
Nosotros tenemos el permiso de su gobierno a abordar su barco.
Modern abandoned ships usually mean only one thing. They're being used for illegal drug traffic. In the days of the great sailing vessels, however, derelict ships were not so easily explained, and no abandoned vessel has remained as mysterious as the Mary Celeste. Theories abound as to why the Mary Celeste was abandoned. It might have been the result of a prearranged salvage fraud, pirates, mutiny, a burst of deadly marine gas, or even a homicidal maniac, killing the rest of the crew one by one, dumping their bodies, and then committing suicide. To try to unravel the web of intrigue surrounding the Mary Celeste, we must examine a reenactment of that fateful voyage in the winter of 1872. On November 2nd, in the New York harbor, the Mary Celeste completed loading her cargo, 1,700 barrels of alcohol. During the loading, 2 of the kegs slipped, damaging the longboat so severely it was put ashore as useless. A replacement could not be found, but the Mary Celeste still carried her yawl on deck. If absolutely necessary, it could accommodate the entire ship's company. The master, Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, brought his wife Sarah and 2-year-old daughter Sophia on board for the voyage. In his final letter to his mother, he wrote,
"It seems real home-like since Sarah and Sophia got here, and we enjoy our little quarters. Sophia has got over the bad cold she had when she came, and has a first-class appetite for hash and bread and butter. I think the voyage will do her lots of good. Our vessel is in beautiful trim, and I hope we shall have a fine passage."
To this, Sarah added,
Benjamin thinks we've got a pretty peaceable crew this time, all round, if they continue as they have begun.
The night before the Mary Celeste sailed, Captain Briggs dined with Captain David Reed Morehouse of the Dei Gratia.
This makes a change this day and age, really.
The 2 ships were moored side by side at the dock.
Very slipshod about it all.
In light of subsequent events, this was a strange coincidence. The two men knew each other well. What did Captain Morehouse think of Briggs?
Briggs was a teetotaler and a God-fearing man. He could be stern when occasion required it, and was not a man to be intimidated or imposed upon. But he was just and considerate towards the men serving under him, just as he was gentle and affectionate in his family relations.
1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4.
On November 5th, 1872, the Mary Celeste set sail. One month later, she was sighted by the Dei Gratia. The Mary Celeste was drifting, unmanned, 800 miles off the Portuguese coast. She would be sailed by a skeleton crew from the Dei Gratia to Gibraltar, where the official inquiry was held. At the British Admiralty Court, the proceedings opened with Captain Morehouse's description of his first sighting of the Mary Celeste.
I reckon the way the yards were square, she was running before the wind when she was abandoned. It's possible the storm that we met at 4 o'clock that morning might have sent her round had she also met it. First time I saw her, 2 o'clock afternoon, her head was westward. The jib was trimmed on the port side, although she was on a starboard tack. She was yawing, coming up to the wind then, falling off. I judged something was amiss. I thought I saw a flag of distress at her yard, but subsequently it turned out to be a flapping sail. By 3 o'clock, we were about 350 yards off. I hailed her, but got no reply, and I couldn't see anyone on deck. So I sent Mr. Devereux, my second mate, over to board her, and in due course he signaled me to come over myself. When I got on board, Mr. Devereux had already sounded the pumps, which showed she made little or no water.
During the next hour, Captain Morehouse would carefully inspect every inch of the ship.
The ship was perfectly sound. Her hull, masts, and yards were in good condition. Her cargo, which was barrels of alcohol, was properly stowed and hadn't shifted, but the forehatch had been lifted off.
This was only one of the many enigmas Morehouse would encounter.
I came to the conclusion that she'd been left in a panic. The mainsail was lying loose, as if it had been run down. The lazarette hatch was also off, but there were plenty of provisions and water in there.
Anybody below?
The glass on the compass was smashed. Compass glass is smashed. Together, we searched the ship from stem to stern. At first, we were worried that she was a fever ship and the crew had died of cholera, but there wasn't a soul on board, nor were there any visible signs of there having been any trouble. In the forecastle, oilskins, boots, and pipes were scattered about as if abandoned in great haste, and among the dunnage were articles of value you might have supposed their owners would have taken if abandoning ship. In the galley, everything was in good order, as it would be between meals. There was no wine, beer, or spirits on board. A child's clothing and toys were strewn about. And on the table was a sewing machine with a baby's pinafore on it and a number of small items lying on the table alongside. There were books and charts, but the chronometers and the ship's log were missing. The slate log had an unfinished letter beginning Fanny, my dear wife, Francis N.R., which I took to be the start of a message scribbled by the mate. The ship's boat was missing. You could see where the boat had been lashed across the main hatch, but that was not the right place for her. There were no signs of any tackle to launch her, but we usually launched our boat from the rail with only a tow rope to secure her. I saw no remains of painter or boat's rope fastened to the rail.
Captain Morehouse's observations were detailed, but they raised more questions than they answered. The man responsible for the official inquiry was Mr. Solly Flood, Her Majesty's Advocate General, proctor for the Queen in her Office of Admiralty, and a legal bloodhound. A new age of belief in science, invention, and technology was dawning. The ability to seek and find cold, hard evidence in order to solve any mystery was reaching a golden era. Was there any evidence to indicate foul play? The only facts available so far, a ship in good order, yet abandoned in a hurry. The investigation about to take place in Gibraltar would propel the Mary Celeste to her place as the most infamous abandoned ship in the history of the sea. Advocate General Solly Flood boarded the Mary Celeste to examine it in minute detail.
There was no appearance of fire or explosion or any other assignable cause of abandonment. She was well provisioned and it seems had encountered no seriously heavy weather. She was thoroughly sound, staunch, and strong, and in every way seaworthy and well found. But both bows had been recently cut by a sharp instrument. On the starboard topgallant rail, there were marks apparently of blood and a mark of a blow, apparently by a sharp axe. A sword appeared to me to exhibit traces of blood and to have been wiped before being returned to its scabbard. In the forehatch, a barrel, ostensibly of alcohol, appeared to have been tampered with. My object is to move the Board of Trade to take such action as they may think fit, to discover, if possible, the fate of the master, whose name was Briggs, his wife and child, and the crew of the derelict. My own theory, or guess, is that the crew got at the alcohol and in the fury of drunkenness murdered the master and his wife and child and the chief mate, that they then damaged the bows of the vessel so as to give it the appearance of having struck on some rocks or suffered some collision, with a view to inducing the master of any vessel which might pick them up if they saw her at some distance, not to think her worth attempting to save. And that they did, sometime between the 25th of November and the 5th of December, escape on board some vessel bound for some South or North American port or the West Indies.
Was this the real story? Mutiny and murder? The Advocate General was convinced he was on the trail of a sensational crime. Soon, the story spread to the newspapers of the world and began to read like a modern detective yarn. As the inquiry proceeded, however, it became increasingly evident that the Advocate General had let his imagination run wild. Flood was later found to be wrong on almost every statement he made. The forensic tests proved that the sinister, bloody sword was really an old bayonet used to mix paints, and the blood on the rail was only rust. The final results of the inquiry cleared Captain Morehouse and the Dei Gratia crew of piracy, and in fact, the Dei Gratia was awarded a portion of the salvage value. There, the story might have ended, but for an amazing discovery 30 years later. A young apprentice sailor was sent ashore to collect some sand at St. Paul's Rocks, a tiny island in the middle of the South Atlantic. He found a skeleton propped in the shade of a rock. And beside it, a bottle stuffed with a soiled and faded letter. A letter which told an amazing tale.
My ship struck these rocks at dawn 3 days ago. She sank immediately. Only I, of all her crew, reached the shore alive. I am dying of thirst. It has been a voyage of disaster. 3 deaths in 2 days. Then came the poison on the 7th day out. Ship helpless, and so for 3 days we lay. Knew we must ask assistance to take us to Gibraltar for crew. Early morning sighted small brig becalmed. Mate said, take her crew. Went aboard. Captain asked why we came. His wife and child were with him. We left no one on board. The brig was called Mary Celeste.
Years later, this tragic letter was brought to public attention in the London Daily Express. Was this at last the real clue to the mystery of the Mary Celeste? If so, why did the young sailor wait 9 years to publish the letter? Many people doubt its authenticity. It is just one of the hundreds of theories proposed during the last century. There is a universal sailor's superstition about ships born unlucky. And the Mary Celeste lived up to that superstition. From all the evidence collected, In Search Of proposes a logical explanation. The Mary Celeste had been at sea for 8 days. The hatches had remained closed because at first the weather was stormy. Gradually, though, the cold November chill of New York gave way to the milder latitudes of the Azores. The cargo of alcohol was stored in barrels made of red oak, an extremely porous wood. At least 8 of the barrels leaked badly during the voyage. Battened down under the hatches, the fumes mingled with the foul air of the hold. Was a potentially explosive mixture of gas forming? Off the Azores, the wind dropped to a gentle breeze. Taking advantage of the calm weather, Briggs probably ordered the ventilation of the hold, which may have set off a fateful chain of events. An upward rush of fumes, perhaps even an explosion. Then, steam, looking like smoke, poured out of the hatch.
Abandon ship!
Some of the men began to take in sail. Convinced that the ship was about to blow up, Briggs ordered the boat lowered. A sailor broke out a coil of rope as a tow line from the lazarette. Someone grabbed some tins of preserved meat. Briggs snatched up his chronometer and any of the ship's papers he could quickly lay his hands on. Feeling certain that time was of the essence, he urgently herded his family and crew to the yawl. According to meteorological reports, a sudden squall blew up that day. Under the impact of a violent gust, the vessel may have lunged forward with a suddenness and force which broke the improvised tow line. They may have tried to row after the Mary Celeste, or they may have turned toward the island of Santa Maria, a jagged, inhospitable coastline where a small boat and her occupants would easily be smashed to pieces in the surf. The wind shifted, however, so it seems more probable that the small boat was blown southeast, away from the island and out into the vast reaches of the Atlantic, disappear forever. When the Mary Celeste was found on December 5th, the last entry on her log slate was for the morning of November 25th, 11 days earlier. This entry put the Mary Celeste 6 miles north of the island of Santa Maria in the Azores. With the set of her sails, and with no one at her helm, her natural course would be roughly at right angles to the wind. This presumably was how, over the 10 days, she covered the 750 miles between the last entry in the log and the position where she was first sighted by the Dei Gratia. What has been reenacted seems to be the most likely explanation. But whatever the cause of the panic, Captain Morehouse was certain of one thing.
Captain Briggs bore the highest character for seamanship and correctness, and would not, I think, desert his ship except to save his life.
The Mary Celeste became a marked ship. Sailors being superstitious, no one wanted to own her, sail her, or have anything to do with her. She was sold and resold rapidly at well below her commercial value. 13 years after the events we have described, she was deliberately wrecked by her owners in a failed insurance fraud scheme. On Rochelle's Reef off Haiti, she quickly broke up. And today, there is no more trace of her than there is of Captain Briggs and his crew of that fateful voyage of 1872.
Coming up next, voyage with a team of psychics in search of shipwrecks. Then, agents hunting down a ring of drug dealers get help from a courageous father on FBI, The Untold Stories. Log on at veterans.com, a new website brought to you by the History Channel. Veterans.com, a place where veterans, their families, and others can connect, share stories, and pass on the legacies of all American veterans.